Hey guys, and welcome to a little bit of a different video. Today we're going to be doing some analysis of the mighty Ungrim Iron Fist and having a quick look at how the new DLC and patch in general has changed the performance of the mighty Dowie Lord. Should be some good fun. We're going to be pitting him up against 6 really tough, big, monstrous creatures and competitors and seeing how the new Dwarf Lord, or not new Dwarf Lord, but new and improved Lord, does indeed fare. So have a quick little look at his stats here and the changes. You'll notice there's not too much difference. So what's happened to him in the latest patch, he has lost a tiny amount of melee attack, which is completely fine. He had huge ample amounts of melee attack anyway and didn't necessarily need quite so much. So he's lowered that a tiny bit, but in return has gained a pretty substantial amount of melee defense, meaning he is going to be a bit harder to hit, which is certainly going to come in handy up against some of the hard hitting monsters he is going to end up dueling. He's also increased a little bit of his weapon strength, and for the sake of testing, we are indeed going to be bringing all of his items. So we have the Axe of Dargo, Red Ruin, Deadly Onslaught, Foe Seeker, Death Blow, and of course the mighty Dowie Lord is unbreakable as always. Now I don't think this is necessarily the best toolkit in multiplayer. You don't need Red Ruin, but apart from that the rest of the items are pretty good, and for the sake of the analysis today we are of course going to be bringing all of his items. Now, the effects to mass should help him quite a lot against big creatures. He tended just to get flung down and flung all over the place. So it's going to be interesting to see how he does perform. And coming in with this toolkit, he is going to cost 1,892 gold. And he is far and away the cheapest Finn he's going to be facing today as well. And up in the skies is his first challenger. We have the Emperor of Mankind himself, the mighty Franz, of course, on the mighty Deathclaw as well. He's going to be bringing his full toolkit, of course, which every opponent today is going to be bringing as well. And he comes in at a whopping 2,704 cost. So he is far more expensive than Ungrim himself. So we're going to come in for a charge and make sure we pop all our abilities as well. So swooping high above the skies, Franz does indeed stalk. And in we come with all our buffs. And as you can see, Ungrim barely gives an inch. He does simply not care about you charging into his face anymore. And just as I say that, he does indeed get flung to the ground. And Deathclaw tramples him a little bit. But this happens maybe once every 5 fights up against someone like Franz, which is pretty insane change to how characters usually happens to them. And as we can see, Franz is taking an absolute hammering. Now, he can still do very decent damage back to Ungrim, but the mighty Slayer King, as far as I've tested, wins this fight every single time, which is very impressive. I think with some really lucky RNG, the mighty Franz may be able to seal the deal, but in all my testings, Ungrim always seemed to come out on top, which is pretty crazy for someone who costs nearly 1,000 gold less. Anyway guys, on to round 2. And up next, guys, is the Thing, the new Regiment of Renowned Hell Pit Abomination, one of the new units that the Skaven are gaining in this DLC, and it is a scary foe indeed. Of course, big Terracauser, which won't matter in this matchup, but has regeneration, armor piercing, and all the usual stuff you expect from a Hell Pit Abomination, from, rats emerge to too horrible to die, but at the same time, this pesky beast does come with fluid injection, going to increase its melee attack, base weapon damage, and armor piercing. That melee attack really going to help out up against the mighty Slayer King himself, so we're going to have to see how he does indeed fare up against the power of the Thing. So I'm going to be charging in here, and of course we are going to be using the Thing's abilities. All abilities and items are going to be allowed to be used in these testings, of course. Now the Thing is rather expensive, coming in at a pretty whopping 2,250, making him a bit cheaper than the mighty Franz we saw earlier, but still far more expensive than the Slayer King, who is currently knee-deep in kind of just discussing flesh and warpstone here, and he's going to be hacking and swinging, having his best time. And the Hellpit Abomination is something which is a pretty decent duelist all round. If we have a little look at the health and see how things are going, looks like both our combatants are down to about half health, which is pretty crazy. And Ungrim standing firm, not been knocked over once yet. Even with those big swinging animations, Ungrim just kind of grinds back a little bit on the ground before laughing and swinging his mighty axe. And as you can see, he's doing a pretty nifty job, and the Thing is indeed going to rout here, which is pretty terrible. Now, I've done this test multiple times, and it is incredibly close, often coming down to see if the Thing does indeed get its regeneration proc, or if it turns into a pesky amount of rats. But this time, its leadership is broken, and the Slayer King shall remain you know, true the king of the hill at the moment. He is 2 for 0, although I would say this matchup tends to be a little bit more 50-50. But on to round 2, guys. Actually, we'll play this out and see how he does come in, if we see him waddle over. But he has, of course, had a bit more time to regenerate now, and maybe we'll be able to swing things back in his favour. As Ungrim, though, does manage to pop Foe Seeker once more and have a pretty good time slaying the mighty thing. Although maybe the Skaven Slave Spears will be able to avenge them, as Ungrim does get incredibly beat up in this matchup. Anyway, we will fast forward now until Army Losses does set in, and I'll see you guys in the next round. And up next, guys, we do indeed have the mighty Kholek Sun Eater, the OG of these testing type videos. He's always the guy you'd seem to see in these videos being used to test these mighty heroes, and he is coming in with the Star Crusher, of course, his mighty maul. He also has Stand or Die, Lord of the Storm, and all that good stuff, and he shall be a pretty mighty foe indeed. Now, we'll be very interesting to see how Ungrim does fare here. I think normally Kholek does win, at least in the old patches, so it'll be interesting to see how the mighty Ungrim can stand up to him now that he won't be getting flung around quite so much. So on the charge in here, we of course are going to pop all our abilities, as we do in every single one of these tests. Going to pop Foe Seeker on the way in to try and gain the best charge bonus, and we're going to plop in here and take some massive swinging attack animations, although Ungrim is going to be twirling that mighty blade of his, and for a dwarf, he's pretty quick with that thing, swinging around and doing some awesome damage. And Kholek is pretty bloody already. You can see swabs of blood just kind of roaming, but there Ungrim goes, getting punted back by a massive slap from the Star Crusher, but he is back up on his feet, and as the charge comes in, he's simply going to grind to a halt and start fighting once more. And Ungrim at this point is relatively close with the mighty Kholek. It's a very even fight so far. Big overhanded swing comes in from Ungrim, and it looks like Kholek's morale may break him. That is a big defining moment in these tests, the fact that Ungrim is unbreakable and he was always fight to the death. And of course Kholek comes in at 2,812 gold, which is nearly 1,000 more than the mighty Ungrim. Now I've tested this one a couple of times as well, and it is quite 50-50. I think maybe slightly swaying in Ungrim's favour, but of course it is a bit more of a roll of the dice. As you can see, the Slayer King did get very beat up there as well, but for points cost, he does very well, punching far above his own weight. On to the next round. Up next, guys, we have the King of the Jungle, the Shredder of Lustria, the most expensive unit we're going to be seeing today, which comes in a whopping 3,700 gold and is an absolute monster. Coming in with ridiculous weapon strength, pretty decent armor all round as well, and a very tanky health pool of over 11,000 HP. One of the biggest bonuses the Shredder is going to have in this matchup is the fact that these little pesky skinks on the back are going to be poisoning Ungrim, lowering his stats as well, which could give significant advantage to the mighty Shredder of Lustria. We're going to have to see how he does fare. So far, Ungrim has punched massively above his body weight so far, but can he take on the true king? Only time will tell. So let's pop in here to a glorious cinematic, and thump! A big old snap of the jaws there from the Shredder, doing some pretty good damage, but at the same time Ungrim is holding the line. You can see he has a ton of javelins sticking around him as well, but he's not doing too bad for himself. You can see though he's down to below half health now, and the Shredder has barely been touched, which is pretty much how this test has gone so far every time I've done it. Unfortunately, the Shredder is just one beast slightly too large for Ungrim, and the Shredder does munch him pretty effectively without taking too much damage. And I say not too much damage, down to below 9,000 HP is certainly good for the little dwarf lord. However, nothing can stand up to the might of the Shredder, and for this one we're actually going to go into the end stats here, just so we can see the value gained from Ungrim. So in this matchup, the damage dealt was only 882. He couldn't really get that money back that he is worth up against such overwhelming power that is the Shredder of Lustria. In almost every other matchup, win or loss, as I said before, sometimes Ungrim can indeed lose to Kholek and can indeed lose to the Regiment round to help it. Those matchups are both relatively 50-50. Even when he lost, he still gained way more damage value than his actual cost. But in this matchup, the Shredder is the true king of the jungle, snapping up the poor little Ungrim. Anyway guys, on to the next round. Here we are, guys, and up next it is going to be the Sisters of Twilight, who of course are going to be using their long-range shots as well. So let's pause this while we do a tiny bit of analysis before the action does get underway. And the Sisters are going to be representing the new Wood Elves and some of the units that you can get from their DLC. And I did try this matchup with Durfu a full few times to try and represent the Wood Elves, but yeah, that kind of went about as well as you expect. Dwarf with giant axe chops up tree. By the way, Sister Twilight going to be coming in with that lovely poison damage, but at the same time magic damage, and of course Ungrim is a dwarf, so he's going to be able to negate some of that. What we're going to be doing as well is switching it to the Talons of Dusk once we engage in combat, which is going to poison Ungrim and at the same time work as a shotgun blast. But on the way in, we are going to use Talons of Dawn, Eagle Quiver, and we'll get off one breath attack to try and make it as even as possible. But at the same time, these sisters are rather expensive, coming with all their items and abilities. So flying in over here, we will pop one of these items onto Ungrim. There we go, and we will swing in for a fat breath attack. And this is just to show the advantage, of course, of being the Flying Lord before we do indeed have to engage in combat. We are going to switch to there, do a little breath attack down on the little dwarfling before charging in to glorious hand-to-hand. And as you can see, we have a massive advantage from the off, coming in with those magic missiles, as well as the breath attack. And Ungrim is indeed clobbered to the ground here, but he is now back up on his feet and standing firm. And you can see big gash instantly appearing in the shoulder of that dragon, as Ungrim does finally get to grips with that mighty axe of Dargo of his, and he can do some pretty disgusting work all round. But as you can see, the Lord Dwarf Lord is struggling a little bit here, and that is simply because of the breath attacks and the arrows of Kernos and the like. But despite that, he still slaughters these sisters. Pretty close fights all round, but he does tend to win this one. Of course, if you fly back up in the air and kite and so forth with the archery, you can indeed win. But all round, Ungrim tends to win this matchup as well. So he's doing pretty good for himself so far, as we do move on to the final test. And for the final test, guys, it only makes sense to bring a golden dragon. And that's right, that is a star dragon, chevrons all the way up to triple gold chevrons. This beastie comes in a whopping 3,134 cost. It is incredibly expensive, and it only makes sense as well to take on the Slayer King with, you know, the old fantasy trope of the mighty Slayer up against the dragon. And Ungrim does come in as well with a dragon cloak, so it makes perfect sense to me. So I'm going to see how the Star Dragon does fare here. Only rocking 6,000 HP. It is a little bit more squishy than some of the monsters we have seen so far, but comes in with some pretty impressive attack stats to boot as well. And he comes swooping in to take the fight to the mighty dwarf. But once again, Ungrim standing on his feet and going to be planting those dwarven feet as if he was on an oath stone himself and swinging back at the beast. And the dragon is struggling a little bit here. Actually seems to get staggered by the Dwarf Lord, which is pretty funny, as these tend to go the other way round. And Ungrim is chunking at that Star Dragon's health very, very violently here. Doing some pretty decent work with all his buffs being popped. Of course, the Red Ruin is going to make him a little bit more squishy himself, but in return, his damage output is absolutely furious. And this Star Dragon is now turning its back onto Ungrim. He doesn't want to be here. He wants to escape as quickly as possible. And the mighty Slayer King shall add another dragon skull to his collection, which I'm sure is very plentiful. And as you can see, the Star Dragon does indeed rout here, but if it fights to the death, it does tend to die as well. And for what I've tested this one, if you just float up above and you get all 3 breath attacks off, you're going to win with the Star Dragon, but you don't often have that luxury in the middle of the battlefield. And in toe-to-toe combat, Ungrim quite happily takes the cake here. And considering he is significantly cheaper, as I said before, he is 1,892 cost. He is certainly punching above his weight, and I think the new changes to his mass so he stays fighting for longer, it actually helps him a huge amount, because even the large beasts do indeed stagger, and when they do, Ungrim is going to be there to take charge and start, you know, really hammering them down. So do I think Ungrim is going to be a competitive pick we're going to see far more often? Only time will tell, honestly. I really like him. I used to bring him anyway, but that's because I love to bring Ungrim in general. But I think the Grombrindle being unbreakable now may push Ungrim slightly further away, as I think Grombrindle with his smoke bomb is a little bit more versatile in general. But up against the large beasts, Ungrim is your man. Now, some of these replays won't happen every single time. So, as I said previously, Kholek and the Hellpit did beat him on multiple occasions during my testing. Dreadsaurian always beat him, but Franz, Durfu, Sisters of Twilight, kind of the Golden Dragon, always seem to come up bottom against the mighty Ungrim. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this unit testing. Not something I've done before, so feel free to let me know in the comments down below if you'd like anything else tested, or if you'd rather just go back to doing these standard battle replays. But until next time guys, as always, stay awesome. Feel free to give this video a big old thumbs up and subscribe for more Total War Warhammer content. Peace guys.